I was halfway through waxing my fishing boat. One of those small joys that make you feel like the king of your own driveway, when I heard it. That voice. The one that could slice through a Sunday morning like a rusty lawnmower. Franklin, that boat doesn't belong here. And just like that, the comm snapped. Sandra Hemley, queen bee of the HOA, pastel sweater over her shoulders, strutting up the drive with a look like I'd spray-painted her mailbox instead of, parking my own boat. It was always her, always with a new complaint, always holding her clipboard like it was the sword of neighborhood justice. It's in my driveway, Sandra. I'm taking it out on the lake tomorrow. I didn't bother hiding the edge in my voice. She marched up anyway, practically counting the minutes on her fingers. The bylaws say no boats in the driveway more than 6 hours. It's been here since sunrise. I looked at my watch, 5 hours on the dot. She scoffed, and we both knew she was itching to slap a fine on me, maybe call a tow truck for good measure. I could see it in her eyes, the thrill of control. I'd dealt with it before. Got written up once for my flag display. Apparently, my POWMIA banner was unapproved. Once, it was the shade of my mailbox. Every time, a new rule, a new battle. But the boat was different. It wasn't just a hobby. It was the one thing left from my old man. We used to fish every Saturday, him and me. Now it was me and my kid, Calb, when I could pry him off his tablet. That boat meant something. So I stared her down and said, I'll move it after I take it out tomorrow. Same as always. Sandra's lips went thin, then she spun on her heel, like she'd just won something, and stomped off. I watched her go, heart pounding. She didn't have the legal authority, but she had nerve, and that counted for something in our little kingdom. Later that night, I spotted some guy in an HOA windbreaker creeping around my truck, scribbling on a clipboard. He left a violation notice, immediate removal required. Subject to HOA seizure. Seizure. That word sat in my gut like a bad sandwich. I dug up the bylaws. Nope, nothing about seizing anything, not unless it was blocking a street or was a safety hazard. So I called the Lake Patrol, just in case Sandra got creative. Officer Deegan picked up. As long as your boat's registered and you're on the lake, the HOA can't touch you, he said. Their rules stop at the shoreline. I slept a little easier, but not much. Next morning, I hitched up the boat at dawn, and wouldn't you know, Sandra came charging out like I was making a getaway. You can't take that boat onto HOA property. I just smiled. Good news, I'm taking it off HOA property. Heading for the lake. She tried to bluff about a tow truck meeting us at the dock. I almost laughed. You're gonna tow it out of the water? She didn't blink, just glared. As I drove off, I could feel her watching, like a storm cloud waiting to burst. At the public launch, the sun broke through the trees and the lake shimmered. I was unhooking the winch when Sandra pulled up, this time with backup, a younger guy from her Facebook patrol. She marched down the ramp in her kitten heels, barking about community ordinances. But before I could answer, a green patrol boat cruised up. Officer Deegan, sunglasses on, mug of coffee in hand, the picture of calm authority. Everything all right here? He called. Sandra started in. About violations. Deegan just shook his head. This is public water, ma'am. Unless you've got a badge or a court order, you're done here. The clipboard kid looked ready to bolt. Sandra threatened to have my truck and trailer towed. Deegan stepped right onto the ramp. Touch it, and you're trespassing. Suddenly, she didn't have much to say. I launched the boat and cruised out, watching Sandra shrink in the mirror, her little empire crumbling in the morning sun. I should have known peace wouldn't last. Came back to the ramp at noon, big orange sticker on my windshield, pending property. Lean. Sandra had escalated. I called Deegan again. He was there in minutes, snapping photos. That's when we spotted a black sedan idling nearby, a process server, hired by the HOA. They were filing a lien through small claims, betting I'd be too busy or too tired to fight. But I had a secret weapon. My cousin Lindsay, real estate attorney, sharp as a tack. She found all the holes, wrong forms, forged dates, violations I'd never even heard about. And the real twist? Jorge, my neighbor, dropped off a USB drive with HOA memos, Sandra instructing her board to create a paper trail for habitual violators like me. That was the smoking gun. We took it to the state board and the local judge. The whole thing unraveled. Fines, fake meeting minutes, hidden amendments. That's when the news hit. Local reporter Malari picked it up, digging through receipts, HOA beautification, funds that had never been spent. Suddenly, Sandra's world fell apart. The treasurer quit. Board members jumped ship, and the county sheriff started asking questions. Next thing I know, Sandra's house gets raided. She's let out in cuffs, neighbors watching silent from their lawns. You ever see justice happen in real life? It's quieter than you'd think. Nobody cheering, just relief. The neighborhood changed, fast. People stopped scurrying indoors, started chatting on porches. A retired Navy officer, Denise, got elected interim president at the biggest meeting we'd ever had. No secret fines, no more slush funds, every vote out in the open. But the story wasn't over. The county investigator found a second ledger, hidden in the treasurer's desk, with records of fake liens and properties flipped for cash. 3 elderly folks run out of their homes. Paperwork forged and houses sold to a shell company. Gregory, the old treasurer, tried to disappear, but got picked up in Georgia. Sandra and her crew hadn't just machined for stealing homes. My name was on their list. Boat is leverage. Turns out, the boat was never the real problem. It was me. They wanted me out because I didn't fold. So, with the help of folks like Denise and Jorge, we started tracking down other victims, getting their homes back, clearing bogus fines, turning the tide for the whole block. At the next meeting, Denise rolled out full transparency, county auditors in the room, real applause this time. Even Ray, a young mechanic who'd been fined for parking his work truck, finally felt safe to speak up. I realized sometimes all it takes is the right person to stand up and say, enough. One weekend, Calb and I went fishing, water sparkling, the whole world wide open. As we packed up, a county official handed me a manila envelope. You've been appointed as community liaison for the HOA Oversight Council. It's a pilot. You don't have to take it. I looked at my son, then back at the water. Yeah, I do. You know, it's funny. After all that, the lake felt different, like it finally belonged to all of us. And maybe, just maybe, it always had. So, tell me, who do you think was right? Where's the line between rules and control? Drop your thoughts below, smash that like if you've ever tangled with an HOA, and don't forget to subscribe for more wild stories, just like this. So that's how I found myself. A few weeks later, sitting at the corner table in our freshly repainted community center, a folder thick with HOA paperwork at my elbow, a badge clipped to my shirt that said, Resident Accountability. Delegate. I swear, you can't make this stuff up. Waiting for the first real oversight meeting in the neighborhood's history. Denise was there too, standing a little taller now, the crowd's trust, sitting heavy on her shoulders. There were new faces, people I'd only seen in passing, folks who'd kept their heads down during Sandra's reign, now drawn by the promise that maybe, finally, their voices would matter. Funny how fast word spreads. That morning, I'd gotten 3 phone calls from neighbors with old violation notices, some barely legible, some with fines that had ballooned. Like a bad credit card bill. Each one a reminder of how far things had gone. One guy, Dave, stopped me in the parking lot with a box of paperwork under his arm. Never thought I'd live to see the day. Someone asked for these, he said, half laughing, half bitter. I told him, yeah, well, it's about time. Sometimes I wonder how many people just paid out of fear, not because they agreed, but because it was easier than fighting. As the meeting started, Denise laid out the new plan. Full financial transparency, quarterly audits, a resident hotline for complaints, and, this got a round of applause, an immediate end to private towing contracts. The tension in the room started to melt, replaced by something that felt almost like hope. But it wasn't all sunshine. The county investigator, Rudd, stood up next and ran through what they'd found in the old ledger. The 3 elderly residents who lost their homes, the phony maintenance bills, the shell companies, all of it. You could feel the air thicken. For a moment, nobody spoke. And then Lester stood up. You remember Lester, Vietnam vet, the guy they tried to run off with trumped-up foundation repairs? He cleared his throat and said, I just want to know one thing. How do we make sure this never happens again? He looked around, and suddenly everyone was nodding, because that was the question on every mind in the room. Denise promised, no more closed-door meetings, no more one-person rule, everything on record and open to review. But trust, that's not something you rebuild overnight. You know what I mean? Folks wanted more than promises, They wanted proof. That's when the real twist landed. Rudd dropped a folder on the table and started reading from a list. Names of residents. Dollar amounts. A pattern that made the whole room go quiet. Turns out, Sandra and Gregory had compiled what he called an escalation matrix. Basically a hit list of which homes to target for fines, which properties to watch for future acquisition, and a system for cycling enforcement, so it looked random. My name was there, right next to Lester's and a few others. That hit home hard. I realized just how close I'd come to losing everything. Not because I broke any real rule, but because I pushed back. I could see Denise's jaw clench, her hand gripping the chair. Rudd explained how the audit was still ongoing, and there'd be criminal charges for everyone involved. But the bigger question was, how many more like us were out there? He asked me to help reach out, to let people know they could get their money back, that they weren't crazy, that what happened to them was part of a pattern, not just bad luck or a grudge. I agreed on the spot. No way I was walking away now. Not after seeing what these folks had been through. Over the next few weeks, it felt like I was living in someone else's movie. I spent evenings knocking on doors with Denise, listening to stories, some angry, some heartbreakingly sad. Ray, the mechanic, shared how losing his right to park in his own driveway nearly cost him his business. Mrs. Chun, down on Birch Lane, had stopped tending her rose bushes after Sandra fined her for overgrown landscaping. A fine that, we found out, never actually made it into the community ledger. She started crying when I told her she could fight it. I thought I was the only one, she whispered. You hear enough of those stories, and you start to realize community isn't about the bylaws or the board, it's about people looking out for each other when the rules turn cruel. Some nights, after those visits, I'd come home exhausted, drop my folder on the kitchen table, and wonder if maybe the old days weren't better. Back when I could wax my boat in peace and nobody gave a damn. But then Calb would show up, holding 2 sodas, and ask if we could check the fishing line I'd left in the garage, and I'd remember this is what we fought for. Not the right to ignore rules, but the right to live with dignity and a little breathing room. Around the time we started seeing real change, new benches at the playground, the community garden back open, neighbors actually smiling at each other. Another letter showed up in my mailbox. This one was from the county prosecutor's office. Sandra was heading to trial for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Gregory had already flipped, agreed to testify in exchange for a lighter sentence. Turns out, he'd kept even more files in a safe deposit box, audio recordings, emails, everything. It was all going to come out in court. The trial drew half the county to the courthouse, news vans lined up like it was the 4th of July parade. I took the stand, hand on the Bible, and told the story as plain as I could. No dramatics, just the facts. Eliza, the prosecutor, made it clear this wasn't just about stolen money, it was about stolen trust. The defense tried to spin it. Of course, Sandra was overworked, just following bad advice. Maybe she was even a little confused about the rules. Nobody bought it. The evidence was too strong, the witnesses too many. The jury didn't even take a full day to come back guilty. After the verdict, Denise and I stood on the courthouse steps, watching neighbors hug each other. Folks who hadn't spoken in years coming together because, finally, the bad guys lost. There was no ticker tape parade, but you could feel the weight lifting. That night, back at the lake, Calb and I sat on the tailgate of my truck, watching the sun set behind the trees. Think it's really over? He asked. I took a deep breath, felt the cool air on my face. It's never really over, I said, but at least now, we know what to watch for. 2 months later, I saw something I never expected, a real election. Candidates taking questions, promising term limits, full access to records, actual resident votes. Denise won in a landslide, but what mattered more was the attitude. Nobody was afraid anymore. At the next meeting, Ray brought donuts, Mrs. Chun brought her roses, and Lester stood up and read a letter thanking the board for bringing him home. You want to talk about community? That was it. Right there. People standing together, not just for themselves, but for the ones who hadn't been so lucky. So here's where I leave you. Maybe you're sitting there thinking this could never happen on your street. Or maybe you've seen a little too much of Sandra in your own HOA president. Either way, let this story be a warning and a challenge. Power only works if you let it. And sometimes, all it takes is one person, maybe you, maybe the next guy, to say, enough, to fight, not because you want trouble, but because you want peace. If you've ever had to battle an HOA, if you've got your own story about standing up to bullies in cardigans and clipboards, drop it in the comments. I read every one. And hey, if you want more wild neighborhood tales, hit subscribe and stick around. You never know when the next storm's gonna roll through.